In the shadowed corridors of Kensington Palace, where centuries of secrets whisper through tapestried walls, Prince Alexander of Wessex thought he knew every stone, every hidden passage, every family mystery. But when he inherited his grandmother's estate and discovered a locked room that wasn't supposed to exist, he uncovered a truth so devastating it would shatter everything he believed about his family, his stepmother Lady Catherine, and the very foundation of his future throne. Some secrets are buried for a reason. Some truths are too dangerous to speak. And some discoveries change everything forever. The morning fog clung to the ancient stones of Raven's Hollow estate, like ghostly fingers reluctant to let go of their secrets. Prince Alexander stood at the iron gates, his breath visible in the crisp October air, staring at the Gothic mansion that now belonged to him. 3 months had passed since his beloved grandmother, Queen Mother Eleanor, had died peacefully in her sleep, leaving him this sprawling estate on the Scottish border along with a cryptic note that had been haunting his thoughts ever since. The truth lies where the roses bloom eternal, my dear boy. When you're ready to see what I couldn't bear to reveal, look beyond what appears to be the end. Alexander had read those words 100 times, turning the elegant script over in his mind like a puzzle with missing pieces. His grandmother had always spoken in riddles, delighting in wordplay and hidden meanings, but this felt different, urgent, almost desperate. The estate stretched before him, a testament to 5 centuries of royal history. Raven's Hollow had been in the family since 1523, passed down through generations of royals who had used it as a private retreat away from the scrutinizing eyes of the public and press. Alexander's own father, King Charles, had spent summers here as a child, and Alexander himself had countless memories of racing through its endless corridors and exploring its vast gardens with his younger brother Prince Marcus. Now, as the heir apparent at 31, Alexander found himself the sole inheritor of not just the property, but whatever secrets his grandmother had deemed too important to take to her grave. His phone buzzed insistently in his coat pocket. Without looking, he knew it would be another call from his stepmother, Lady Catherine Fairfax, who had married his father 5 years ago after a whirlwind courtship that had shocked the nation. She had been calling constantly since he'd announced his intention to personally oversee the estate's inventory, something that traditionally would have been handled by palace staff. Alexander, darling, surely there's no need for you to burden yourself with such tedious work, she had said during their last conversation, her voice carrying that peculiar edge it acquired whenever she was displeased. The staff can handle everything. You have far more important matters to attend to as heir to the throne. But Alexander had been firm. Something about his grandmother's note, combined with Catherine's obvious anxiety about his plans, had strengthened his resolve to handle this personally. There were too many questions that needed answers, and he was beginning to suspect that Catherine knew more about those answers than she was letting on. The estate manager, a weathered man named Thomas Hartwell who had worked at Raven's Hollow for over 40 years, met Alexander at the main entrance. His lined face bore the kind of dignity that came from a lifetime of loyal service, and his eyes held a mixture of grief and something else Alexander couldn't quite identify. "Your Highness," Thomas said, bowing slightly. "Welcome back to Raven's Hollow. I'm deeply sorry for your loss. Her Majesty the Queen Mother was truly one of the finest ladies I've ever had the honor to serve." "Thank you, Thomas. I know how much you meant to her as well." Alexander paused, studying the older man's face. "I trust you received my instructions about the inventory?" "Yes, Your Highness. I've prepared a complete list of all the rooms and their contents, though." Thomas hesitated, his fingers worrying at the edge of his jacket. "I should mention, there are some areas of the house that have been sealed for many years. Rooms that even I haven't entered during my time here." Alexander felt a spark of interest. "Sealed? By whose order?" "Your grandmother's instructions, Your Highness. She was very specific that certain areas were to remain undisturbed. Of course, now that the property has passed to you." Thomas trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air. They entered the grand foyer, where afternoon light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the marble floor. Alexander had always loved this room, with its soaring ceilings and the massive chandelier that had witnessed generations of family gatherings. But today, the familiar space felt different somehow, as if the very walls were holding their breath. "I'd like to start with those sealed areas," Alexander said, removing his coat. "Do you have the keys?" Thomas nodded slowly. "I do, Your Highness, though I should warn you that some of these rooms haven't been opened in decades. The Queen Mother was very particular about maintaining her privacy, especially in her later years." As they climbed the main staircase, Alexander found himself remembering childhood visits to Raven's Hollow. His grandmother had always been warm and welcoming, but there had been certain areas of the house that were strictly off-limits. The East Wing, she had explained, was undergoing renovations that seemed to last for years. The tower room was unsafe due to structural issues. The basement storage areas were too dangerous for children. Now, as an adult, Alexander realized how many excuses there had been, how many gentle redirections away from certain parts of the house. His grandmother had been protecting something, but from whom? And why? They reached the third floor, where a long corridor stretched into shadows. Thomas led the way to a heavy oak door at the far end, its surface unmarked by any nameplate or decoration. From his pocket, he withdrew an ornate iron key that looked as old as the house itself. "This was your great-great-grandmother's private study," Thomas explained as he turned the key in the lock. "Queen Victoria Alexandra's personal retreat. Your grandmother sealed it after she passed in 1979, and, to my knowledge, no one has entered since." The door opened with a creak that echoed down the hallway like a sigh released after decades of holding secrets. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light that penetrated the darkness beyond. Alexander stepped inside, and immediately felt the weight of history settling around him like a heavy cloak. The room was perfectly preserved, as if Queen Victoria Alexandra had simply stepped out for tea and might return at any moment. Her mahogany desk sat positioned to catch the morning light, its surface covered with family photographs in silver frames. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes that spoke of a love for literature and history. A small seating area near the fireplace suggested intimate conversations held in confidence. But it was the paintings that caught Alexander's attention. The walls were covered with portraits of family members spanning several generations, but there was something odd about their arrangement. Gaps where paintings should have been, based on the faded rectangles on the wallpaper. Empty hooks that suggested portraits had been deliberately removed. "Thomas," Alexander said slowly, "do you know what happened to the missing paintings?" The older man's expression grew troubled. "I'm afraid I don't, Your Highness. When the Queen Mother sealed this room, she personally oversaw the removal of certain items. She never explained why." Alexander moved to the desk, running his fingers along its polished surface. The photographs showed familiar faces from family albums, but, again, there were gaps. Spaces where pictures had been removed, leaving behind only the faint outlines of their frames on the wood. In the center of the desk sat a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. Alexander opened it carefully, his heart racing as he recognized his great-great-grandmother's handwriting. The entries were dated from 1978, just 1 year before her death. "The burden of truth grows heavier with each passing day," he read silently. "What I discovered about Catherine's family changes everything I believed about loyalty, about trust, about the very nature of love itself. But how can I destroy Charles's happiness with revelations that would shatter not just his world, but the stability of the crown itself?" Alexander's hands trembled slightly as he read those words. Catherine's family. His stepmother Catherine, who wouldn't even be born for another decade when this was written. How could his great-great-grandmother have known anything about Catherine's family? He turned the page, his eyes scanning the elegant script with growing alarm. "The documents I found in the hidden safe tell a story of deception spanning 3 generations. The Fairfax family name itself is built on lies, and their connection to our family runs deeper than anyone suspects. Catherine's grandmother was not who she claimed to be. The fortune that elevated them to nobility was stolen from us, and the evidence of their crimes has been carefully hidden for decades." A chill ran down Alexander's spine. He looked up to find Thomas watching him with concern. "Your Highness? Is everything all right?" Alexander closed the journal carefully, his mind racing. "Thomas, I need you to show me every sealed room in this house. And I need to know everything you remember about what my grandmother removed from this room." "Of course, Your Highness. But may I ask?" Thomas hesitated. "Has something happened? You look quite pale." Alexander tucked the journal under his arm, his grandmother's warning echoing in his mind. Some secrets were indeed too dangerous to speak, but some truths were too important to remain buried. As he followed Thomas from the room, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to uncover something that would change not just his understanding of his family's history, but the entire trajectory of his future. The afternoon sun was beginning to set behind the Scottish hills as they made their way to the next sealed room, casting long shadows through the hallway windows. Alexander thought about Catherine, probably sitting in her elegant London townhouse, perhaps making another phone call to inquire about his progress at Raven's Hollow. Did she know what he was about to discover? Had she always known? As Thomas unlocked the door to what had once been the estate's library, Alexander steeled himself for whatever revelations awaited. His grandmother's note had promised that the truth lay where the roses bloom eternal. He hadn't found any roses yet, but he was beginning to understand that some flowers bloomed in the most unexpected places, and some gardens held secrets that had been planted generations ago, waiting for the right person to finally dig them up. The library door swung open, and Alexander stepped forward into the next chapter of a story he was only beginning to understand. But, with each revelation, one thing became increasingly clear. Lady Catherine Fairfax was not who she appeared to be, and the implications of that deception reached far beyond anything he could have imagined. Outside, the October wind picked up, rattling the windows of Raven's Hollow estate as if the house itself was trying to warn him about the truths that lay ahead. But Alexander was past the point of turning back. Whatever secrets his family had buried, whatever lies had been carefully constructed over decades, it was time for the heir to the throne to finally learn the real price of wearing the crown. The journal under his arm felt heavier with each step, as if the weight of truth itself was pressing down upon him. And, somewhere in the distance, he could swear he heard the faint sound of his phone ringing again. Catherine's name no doubt flashing on the screen as she grew more desperate to know what he had found. But Alexander didn't answer. Not yet. There were still too many rooms to explore, too many secrets to uncover. And, based on what he had already read, he suspected that the worst revelations were still to come. The estate's former library had been transformed into something Alexander barely recognized. Where once towering bookshelves had held centuries of collected wisdom, now only empty wooden frames remained, creating an eerie skeleton of what had been. The books were gone, but their absence told a story of its own. Someone had methodically removed every single volume, leaving behind only dust outlines on the shelves and the lingering scent of old leather and paper. Thomas moved through the room with the careful steps of someone navigating a graveyard. This happened about 15 years ago, Your Highness. The Queen Mother came here personally with a small team of trusted staff. They worked for 3 days, removing books, documents, anything written. She said it was for preservation purposes, moving everything to climate-controlled storage. But you don't believe that was the real reason, Alexander said, watching the older man's face carefully. Thomas paused by what had once been the reference section. Your Highness, in 40 years of service, I learned that the royal family doesn't do anything without multiple reasons. The Queen Mother was particularly careful about information. She understood that knowledge could be both a blessing and a weapon. Alexander ran his fingers along an empty shelf, feeling the grooves where books had rested for decades. His great-great-grandmother's journal had mentioned documents hidden in a safe. If those documents were damaging enough to warrant clearing an entire library, they must contain explosive information indeed. Where would she have taken everything, Thomas? There's a storage facility in Edinburgh that the family has used for decades. Climate-controlled, maximum security. But, Your Highness, if I may be frank, there's something else you should know about the timing of this cleaning. Alexander turned to face him fully. What do you mean? Thomas's weathered hands clasped behind his back, a gesture Alexander remembered from childhood when the estate manager was preparing to deliver news that no one wanted to hear. The library was cleared just 6 months before Lady Catherine first met your father. The timing may be coincidental, but you don't think it was. Alexander felt that familiar chill of foreboding. Every revelation seemed to circle back to Catherine, as if she were the dark center around which all the family's secrets revolved. Your grandmother was many things, Your Highness, but she was never given to coincidences. She planned everything with military precision. If she felt the need to remove a library's worth of documents just months before a certain young woman entered your father's life, well, Thomas left the sentence hanging, but his meaning was clear. Alexander pulled out his phone and scrolled through the missed calls. 12 from Catherine in the last 3 hours, each one coming closer together. Her desperation was becoming palpable, and that only strengthened his conviction that he was on the right trail. Thomas, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, regardless of protocol or loyalty to the family. The older man straightened slightly. Of course, Your Highness. Do you believe Lady Catherine knew my grandmother had information about her family before she married my father? Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the empty shelves around them. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Your Highness, there's something I've never told anyone. Something I witnessed shortly after the engagement was announced." Alexander felt his heart rate increase. "What did you see?" "I was here late one evening, handling some maintenance issues. I heard voices coming from the Queen Mother's private quarters. Raised voices, which was unusual because Her Majesty rarely lost her composure. I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping, but sound carries in these old houses." "What did you hear?" "Lady Catherine was here, which surprised me because she rarely visited Raven's Hollow. She and the Queen Mother were having what could only be called an argument. I heard Lady Catherine say something about insurance policies and mutual understanding. The Queen Mother's response was something about the sins of the Fathers and how the truth would come out eventually." Alexander felt the pieces of a puzzle beginning to form a picture he didn't like. "When was this?" 2 weeks before the wedding, Your Highness. Lady Catherine left that night in quite a state, and the Queen Mother locked herself in her study for 3 days afterward. When she emerged, she seemed to have aged years in those few days. The implications were staggering. If Catherine had known about damaging information regarding her family, and if she had somehow leveraged that knowledge or reached some kind of agreement with his grandmother, then her entire relationship with his father might have been built on manipulation and blackmail. Alexander's phone buzzed with a text message from Catherine. "Alexander, darling, I'm growing quite concerned. Please call me immediately. There are matters we need to discuss urgently." The word urgently sent a chill down his spine. Catherine never used urgent language unless she was truly desperate. "Thomas, show me the rest of the sealed rooms. All of them. And I want to know about any other unusual incidents, any other times Catherine visited when she shouldn't have been here." They left the empty library and continued down the corridor to a narrow staircase that Alexander had never noticed before. It was cleverly concealed behind what appeared to be a decorative panel, but Thomas knew exactly where to press to reveal the hidden passage. "This leads to what we called the Queen Mother's private archive," Thomas explained as they climbed the steep steps. "She had documents here that predated even the official family records, things that were considered too sensitive for the main archives at Buckingham Palace." The staircase opened into a circular room at the top of one of Ravenshallow's smaller towers. Unlike the empty library below, this room was filled with filing cabinets, document boxes, and what appeared to be a sophisticated security system that looked oddly modern for such an ancient setting. "She upgraded the security in here about 20 years ago," Thomas noted, seeing Alexander's surprise. "Biometric locks, temperature controls, the works. Whatever she kept in here, she considered it absolutely crucial to protect." Alexander approached the main filing cabinet, noting that it bore his grandmother's personal seal. As he reached for the handle, Thomas cleared his throat. "Your Highness, before you proceed, there's one more thing you should know. The Queen Mother left specific instructions about this room. She said that if anything ever happened to her, everything in here was to be given to you personally. Not to your father, not to palace officials. To you specifically. She knew I would be the one to find all this. She knew you would be the one willing to act on it, regardless of the personal cost." Alexander opened the first filing cabinet and found it meticulously organized with folders labeled by year and subject. His eyes immediately went to a section marked Fairfax Family Investigation, Confidential. The folder was thick, bulging with documents that spanned what appeared to be several decades of research. He pulled out the folder and opened it on a nearby table. The first document was a private investigator's report dated 15 years ago, shortly after Catherine had begun appearing in London social circles. The report was thorough and damning. Subject: Catherine Helena Fairfax, age 23, claiming nobility through maternal lineage. Investigation reveals extensive fabrication of family history and financial standing. Alexander read on, his hands trembling slightly as the scope of the deception became clear. According to the investigation, Catherine's grandmother had indeed been a member of the minor nobility, but not in the way Catherine claimed. She had been disgraced and exiled from polite society after embezzling funds from a charity she had administered. The family's supposed wealth came not from ancestral lands or investments, but from a carefully orchestrated fraud that had taken advantage of confusion in the records during World War II. But that was just the beginning. As Alexander continued reading, he discovered that Catherine's family had been systematically infiltrating aristocratic circles for generations, each one positioning themselves for advantageous marriages and financial opportunities. Catherine's mother had attempted a similar scheme 25 years earlier, targeting Alexander's uncle before the plan was discovered and quietly terminated. "She's not just an opportunist," Alexander said aloud, his voice echoing in the circular room. "This is generational. Her entire family has been planning this for decades." Thomas, who had been respectfully staying near the door, stepped closer. "Your Highness, there are more folders. I believe the investigation continued right up until the Queen Mother's death." Alexander opened the next folder and found surveillance photographs, phone records, and what appeared to be transcripts of recorded conversations. His grandmother had not only known about Catherine's deception, but had been actively monitoring her activities right up until the wedding and beyond. One transcript, dated just 2 years ago, made his blood run cold. It was a recorded phone conversation between Catherine and an unknown male voice, discussing Phase 2 of what they called the Windsor operation. "The old woman is getting suspicious," Catherine's voice said on the transcript. "She's been asking too many questions about Mother's background. We may need to accelerate the timeline." "Stick to the plan," the male voice responded. "You're in the perfect position now. Once Charles dies and Alexander inherits, you'll have complete access to everything we need. The crown jewels alone are worth the wait. But what if she decides to tell Alexander what she knows? Then, we implement the contingency plan. Elderly people have accidents all the time." Alexander's hands shook as he read those words. The implications were beyond horrifying. Catherine hadn't just married his father for money or position. She had been planning to rob the crown itself, and they had been prepared to murder his grandmother to protect their scheme. His phone rang again, Catherine's name flashing insistently on the screen. This time, he answered. "Hello, Catherine." "Alexander. Thank goodness. I've been so worried about you, darling. How are things going at Ravens Hollow?" Her voice was warm and concerned, exactly as it had always been. But now Alexander could hear the calculation beneath the sweetness, the careful modulation that suggested someone performing a role rather than expressing genuine emotion. "Things are going very well, actually. I'm learning quite a lot about family history." There was the slightest pause before Catherine responded. "How wonderful. Your grandmother did love her stories. I hope you're not taking any of her old tales too seriously, though. You know how elderly people can sometimes confuse fiction with reality." The casual way she dismissed his grandmother's mental state made Alexander's jaw clench. "Actually, everything I'm finding seems quite well documented. Very detailed records, lots of evidence to support her conclusions." Another pause, longer this time. "Evidence? What sort of evidence, darling?" "Oh, you know, financial records, family histories, some quite interesting information about people's backgrounds and motivations. The sort of things that might be important for someone in my position to understand." "Alexander." Catherine's voice had changed subtly, losing some of its warmth. "Perhaps we should meet and discuss whatever you've found. Some historical documents can be taken out of context, especially when they're very old. I'd hate for you to misunderstand anything important." "I think I understand perfectly, Catherine. In fact, I'm beginning to see the whole picture quite clearly." "I'm coming to Scotland," she said abruptly. "We need to talk face to face. There are things about your grandmother's mental state in her final years that you don't know, things that might explain why she kept such strange records." Alexander felt a surge of anger at her continued attempts to discredit his grandmother's memory. "That won't be necessary. I think I have everything I need here." "Alexander, listen to me very carefully." Catherine's voice was now completely cold, all pretense of affection gone. "Whatever you think you've discovered, you need to consider the bigger picture. Your father's happiness, the stability of the monarchy, the public's faith in the royal family. Some secrets are better left buried." "Are you threatening me, Catherine?" "I'm reminding you that you have responsibilities, and that some revelations can hurt innocent people." "What about guilty people?" Alexander asked quietly. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds before Catherine hung up without another word. Alexander set down his phone and looked at Thomas, who had been listening to the conversation with growing alarm. "Your Highness, perhaps we should contact the authorities." "Not yet," Alexander said, his mind racing through possibilities and implications. "I need to understand the full scope of this before I act. If Catherine has been planning this for as long as these documents suggest, she'll have contingency plans. I need to know what those are before she realizes how much I've discovered." He returned to the filing cabinet and pulled out another folder, this one labeled Security Protocols, Emergency Procedures. Inside, he found his grandmother's detailed instructions for exactly this scenario. In the event that the Fairfax deception is discovered, she had written in her careful script, The following steps must be taken immediately to protect both the crown and the innocent members of the family who have been deceived. Alexander read through the protocols with growing admiration for his grandmother's foresight and growing dread at the complexity of the situation she had left for him to handle. Catherine's web of deception was even more extensive than he had imagined, and the potential damage to the monarchy if the truth came out publicly was staggering. But, as he read his grandmother's final note in the file, his resolve strengthened. The crown has survived many challenges throughout history. It will survive the truth, but it cannot survive being built on lies. The choice is yours, Alexander. But remember that honor means doing what is right, regardless of the cost. Outside the tower window, the Scottish countryside was settling into evening shadows. Somewhere out there, Catherine was probably making frantic phone calls, mobilizing whatever resources she had access to, preparing for a confrontation she must have always known might come. But Alexander was no longer the naive prince who had accepted his stepmother at face value. Armed with the truth and his grandmother's careful preparations, he was ready to face whatever Catherine and her family could throw at him. The only question now was whether he could do what needed to be done before they realized just how much danger they were truly in. Alexander spent the night in his grandmother's private archive, reading through decades of meticulously compiled evidence. By dawn, he understood the true scope of what he was facing. Catherine's family hadn't just infiltrated the aristocracy, they had been systematically targeting royal families across Europe for over a century. The Fairfax name itself was stolen from a legitimate noble family who had died out during the Spanish flu pandemic, their identity assumed by Alexander's future step-grandmother in 1920. The most chilling discovery came in a folder marked Active Threats. His grandmother had identified at least 6 other women in Catherine's extended network, all of whom had married into prominent families across Europe in the last decade. It wasn't just about the British crown. It was an international operation designed to destabilize and rob multiple monarchies simultaneously. Thomas had remained with him through the night, bringing coffee and sandwiches while Alexander worked through the files. The old estate manager's face had grown increasingly grim as Alexander shared each new revelation. "Your Highness," Thomas said as the sun began to rise over the Scottish hills, "there's something else you need to see. Something I've been saving for last." He led Alexander to a small safe hidden behind what appeared to be a decorative mirror. Inside were video recordings, dozens of them, labeled with dates spanning the last 5 years. The Queen Mother installed hidden cameras throughout Raven's Hollow after Lady Catherine's first visit, Thomas explained. She suspected something wasn't right and wanted evidence. "What you'll find on these recordings will shock you, Your Highness." It certainly shocked me when she showed them to me before her death. Alexander selected a recording dated 3 years ago, just after Catherine and his father had returned from their honeymoon. The timestamp showed it was recorded at 3:47 a.m., and the location was his father's private study at Raven's Hollow. On the screen, Catherine appeared in the darkened room, moving with the practiced stealth of someone who had done this many times before. She went directly to his father's personal safe, entering the combination without hesitation. Alexander's heart sank as he realized she must have watched his father open it multiple times, memorizing the sequence. From the safe, she removed documents, photographing each one with a small, professional-grade camera. State papers, personal correspondence, financial records. She was systematically documenting everything. But what made Alexander's blood run cold was her efficiency and calm demeanor. This wasn't desperation or opportunity. It was routine. "She's done this before," he whispered. "Many times, Your Highness. Your grandmother recorded her during nearly every visit to Raven's Hollow." But watch this next part. On the screen, Catherine finished photographing the documents and reached deeper into the safe, pulling out what appeared to be a small jewelry box. She opened it to reveal several pieces that Alexander recognized as family heirlooms, items that had been passed down through generations. Catherine photographed each piece from multiple angles, then replaced everything exactly as she had found it. "She's cataloging everything of value," Alexander realized, "building a complete inventory for when she decides to take it." Thomas finished grimly. Alexander selected another recording, this one from just 6 months ago. Catherine was on the phone in what she clearly believed was a private conversation, speaking to someone in a language Alexander didn't immediately recognize until he realized it was French, but spoken with a particular accent. "The old woman is definitely suspicious," Catherine was saying. "She's been asking Charles pointed questions about my family history. We may need to move to the final phase sooner than planned. What does the will situation look like? The voice on the other end asked. Perfect. Charles has updated everything to include me as a major beneficiary. If something happens to him, I get a substantial portion of the private wealth, plus a guaranteed income from the crown estate. But the real prize is Alexander's inheritance. Once Charles is gone and Alexander becomes king, I'll have access to everything through my position as Queen Mother. And Alexander himself? Catherine's laugh was cold and calculating. He trusts me completely. Sweet boy thinks I actually care about his father. He'll be easy to manipulate once he's grieving and overwhelmed with new responsibilities. Men are so predictable when they're emotionally vulnerable. Alexander felt sick. He paused the recording and walked to the window, needing fresh air and perspective. Everything about his stepmother had been a lie, from her affection for his father to her apparently genuine care for Alexander himself. She had been studying them like specimens, learning their weaknesses and planning their downfall. His phone buzzed with a text message. Alexander, I'm driving up to Scotland today. We need to talk immediately. Don't do anything rash before I arrive. Catherine, the word rash struck him as particularly telling. Catherine was clearly panicked, realizing that her careful plans might be unraveling. Thomas approached cautiously. Your Highness, there's one more recording you need to see. It was made just 3 weeks before the Queen Mother died. This recording showed Catherine in his grandmother's private sitting room, the same room where Alexander had found so many family photographs. But in this video, his grandmother was very much alive and confronting Catherine directly. I know exactly who you are and what you're planning, his grandmother was saying, her voice steady despite her frail appearance. The question is whether you're going to end this charade voluntarily or whether I'm going to have to expose you publicly. Catherine, for the first time in any of the recordings, looked genuinely rattled. I don't know what you think you've discovered, but I know about your grandmother's real identity. I know about the embezzled charity funds. I know about your mother's attempt to seduce my son, Edward, 25 years ago. And I know about your current plans for my family's wealth. His grandmother's voice grew stronger with each revelation. What I don't know is whether you're working alone or if this is part of a larger organization. You're an old woman with a vivid imagination, Catherine replied. But her composure was clearly cracking. Charles would never believe such ridiculous accusations. Charles wouldn't want to believe them, his grandmother corrected. But Alexander will. He has the strength to face difficult truths, even about people he cares about. And when the time comes, he'll have all the evidence he needs to protect his family and his future kingdom. Catherine's mask slipped completely. If you try to destroy me, I'll destroy him first. Your precious grandson isn't as perfect as you think. I've been documenting his private life, his relationships, his mistakes. I have enough material to ruin his reputation and his chances of ever becoming a respected king. His grandmother smiled, and in that smile, Alexander saw the steel that had made her one of the most formidable women of her generation. My dear Catherine, you clearly don't understand the nature of the monarchy. We've survived scandals that would have destroyed lesser institutions. What we cannot survive is betrayal from within, which is why you will never succeed. We'll see about that, Catherine said, rising from her chair. You should be very careful, Your Majesty. Elderly people have such fragile health. The threat was unmistakable, and Alexander felt a surge of rage at the casual way Catherine had threatened his beloved grandmother. But what struck him most was his grandmother's response. I'm not afraid of you, child. I've faced down Hitler's bombs and survived the collapse of an empire. You're nothing more than a petty criminal with delusions of grandeur. But you should be afraid of what happens when Alexander learns the truth. Because unlike his father, he won't hesitate to do what's necessary to protect what he loves. The recording ended there, and Alexander stood in the quiet archive room, processing everything he had learned. His grandmother had known she was in danger, had known that Catherine was capable of violence, but she had chosen to protect her family by gathering evidence rather than fleeing to safety. Thomas, he said quietly, I need you to do something for me. I need you to contact the palace security team and have them quietly investigate my father's recent medical reports. Specifically, I want to know if there have been any unexplained incidents, any times when he felt suddenly ill or showed symptoms that didn't match any diagnosed conditions. Thomas's face went pale. Your Highness, surely you don't think. I think Catherine has been planning this for years, and I think she's capable of anything. If she's been slowly poisoning my father, making him believe he's just experiencing the normal effects of aging and stress, it would explain why she's so confident about inheriting his wealth. The possibility was horrifying, but Alexander knew he had to consider every angle. Catherine had demonstrated a complete lack of conscience in every recording, and her casual mention of elderly people having accidents suggested she had already considered eliminating obstacles to her plans. His phone rang, and Catherine's name appeared on the screen. This time, Alexander was ready for her. "Hello, Catherine. I understand you're coming to visit." "Alexander, thank God. I was so worried about you, staying in that dusty old house by yourself. You know how those old places can affect people's minds, make them see things that aren't really there. Actually, I've been seeing things very clearly for the first time in years. Darling, I know you loved your grandmother dearly, but you have to understand that in her final months, she was becoming quite paranoid. She was making wild accusations about people, seeing conspiracies everywhere. It was very sad to watch." "Funny thing about that," Alexander said, watching Thomas prepare to make the security call. "All of her accusations seem to be backed up with solid evidence. Documentation, recordings, financial records. For someone who was supposedly paranoid and confused, she was remarkably thorough in her research." The silence on Catherine's end lasted long enough that Alexander wondered if the call had been dropped. "Alexander," she finally said, and her voice had changed completely. Gone was the warm, motherly tone she had always used with him. This voice was cold, calculating, and unmistakably threatening. "You need to think very carefully about what you do next. Your father is a sick man, more fragile than you realize. The stress of wild accusations and family conflict could be very dangerous for his health. And you know how much you mean to him. It would be terrible if something happened to you that might cause him to have another heart episode." Another heart episode. Alexander's blood ran cold at the casual way she referenced his father's heart attack from 2 years ago, an incident that had never been fully explained but had left his father significantly weakened. "Are you threatening me, Catherine? I'm reminding you that actions have consequences, and that the people you love can be affected by the choices you make. I'll be there in 3 hours. We'll discuss this face to face, and I'm confident we can reach an understanding that protects everyone you care about." She hung up before Alexander could respond, leaving him staring at his phone with the absolute certainty that he was now in a race against time. Catherine was coming to Raven's Hollow, and based on her final threat, she wasn't planning to leave any witnesses to testify against her. "Thomas," he called out urgently, "how long would it take for palace security to get here from London?" "At least 4 hours, Your Highness, assuming they leave immediately. Catherine would arrive first." Alexander looked around the archive room, mentally cataloging the evidence that could destroy her, but also realizing that none of it would matter if he wasn't alive to present it. His grandmother had been wise to gather proof, but she had also understood something else. Sometimes the most dangerous truth is the one that threatens someone with everything to lose. Outside, storm clouds were gathering over the Scottish hills, and Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that the real storm was still to come.